Hi, today we're going to be talking about teaching of Asian students, but we're not going to talk about the methodology, how to teach them. We're going to talk about how their culture and home life can affect how they learn, and then that should affect how you teach them. So on that note, our objectives are to identify different aspects of the Asian life, describe different situations that hinder an Asian student's success in American schools, and describe the different strategies teachers can use to help Asian students. Countries we'll be looking at today are China, South Korea, and Japan. Now, all three of these have differences, but they also have a lot of similarities. Christian perspective. So I found this scripture. It said by Colossians 3:23. It says, "Whatever work you do, do it with all your heart. Do it for the Lord and not for the men." And this kind of says to teachers that we're given these students, and it doesn't matter what ethnicity they are, race, where they come from, if they have English language learning, English language proficiency. It's our job to the Lord to teach these to our best of our abilities. So life in their culture. In Japan, they have a specific way to behave in public within formal situations and then informal situations. So this can be from posture to the position they sit in, which even how they shake their hand. It can be different from a formal situation and then an informal setting. Age also determines who sits where and who's served first. Like in school, so if the oldest student in the class would be sit in the front and then served first compared to the youngest student. You also have the inferior and the superior partner. So the inferior has to submit his own needs and opinions to the superior partner, or it shows disrespect. And then less individualistic. So that means they have a need for group in the society, not for themselves. In China, they have the largest population in the world. And so there's very crowded conditions, so they're comfortable with living in these conditions. They have a little less personal space than what we say here. Like if you think you go to a movie theater, you want to sit in the middle with two empty seats between you and the next person. In China, they're used to less personal space. They're used to sitting right up close to that person. They're also less individualistic, like in Japan. So the need for the group and society instead of your own. They also have a high emphasis on family. So that means the family means a lot. A child knows that their actions have consequences on them, but not just on them, onto their family too. And parents also choose the children's spouses, even though this is changing in today. That's not how we have arranged marriages back then. It's not like that anymore, but the parents do dictate who their child marries, when, where, all those different factors. In South Korea, they also have age and social standing. So the age depends on who served first. And then the social standing is like the age, where if you have a higher social standing, you're served first. You have the best opportunities. They have a high emphasis on their ancestors. They believe that their spirits stay with their families for several generations. So they honor their ancestors. And they also have adopted Western ideals. U.S. traditional dress is worn most of the time in South Korea. At the bottom of each slide is the references, just to clarify that. There's a couple questions throughout this presentation. Please just pause this video and take a second to reflect on these questions. So the first one is, how can you help a Japanese student assimilate to the laid-back culture in America? Because we just said backwards that outward appearances, there's a great emphasis on outward appearances, how you portray yourself in situations. So how can we help these students assimilate to the laid-back culture of America? Migration to the U.S. So most of the people come from money and education. So money is like you're leaving a poor job there and you need, so they come to America and they get a higher paying job. They either send the money back to their families back in their home country, or if they don't have any, they have a more well-off life here. Education too, they want to move for a better education. And so in Asia, there's strict demands and expectations set for these students. For example, at the end of high school, students are only allowed to take one exam that will determine if they're allowed to go into college. And then if they fail that exam, they're not allowed to pursue higher education. So they come to the U.S. to receive a higher education first off, and receive more of a better, almost not laid back kind of education, but more aggressive in the fact that we care about the students more, you could say. In Korea, actually, to get a job in a higher corporation, you need a degree from the U.S. and to speak English, so that's also a major factor in the South Koreans' motives in moving. Also, family and demographic values. So, as you see on the next slide, China in particular is very doesn't have a lot of political freedom, so people will move over for the democratic values, to have freedom of speech, assembly, press. So all three countries, China, Japan, and South Korea, have a Confucian religion. So that means that it's kind of characterized as yin and yang, as the symbol of peace. So it says that well, as it relates to learning, it places a high emphasis on education and the purpose of gaining knowledge instead of passing a test or going to school because you have to. They want to gain the knowledge, and they see teachers as models of morality and knowledge. So you can think of Confucianism as like having peace with yourself and doing things, getting a better education for the knowledge, not because you have to. All three are also capitalist economies. So that means that the capital goods are owned by private individuals and businesses, so they work on the supply and demand. Japan is very democratic. They're democratic. They have all the political freedoms, speech, assembly, press. They're also the third largest GDP, gross domestic products. And China is very different. They're a communist society where it's almost like a dictatorship. Like you have a person running it, and you can't go past those. They don't have political freedoms. They are the fastest growing economy though, but because they are communists, they only allowed the 6 different religions: Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Catholicism, and Protestantism. And Taoism is that central principle of the universe that says that there's a natural order to get to heaven. And that is to live in harmony with nature and the universe. So that can be referenced to like chi energy. So when you see on TV people having the furnitures in specific places, they have to be in tune with themselves. In South Korea, they're also democratic, but not as democratic as Japan. They have their political freedoms, but they're also dependent on international trade. Christianity and Buddhism are another 2 religions that are predominant in South Korea, but you are allowed to practice and believe in other religions, not like China, when you're not allowed to practice outside of those 6 religions. Values and cultural practices. So filial piety, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, humanism, and ritual are 3 components of Confucianism. So filial piety says that your respect for the parents and ancestors and elders. So that's back to respecting and honoring the family. like I said earlier, a child knows that their actions have ramifications for them and their family. So their actions can bring pride and honor to their family, or it can bring dishonor to the family. Humanism is the care and concern for other human beings. And then ritual is the way of doing things. So a major ritual that Asians practice is that the deceased ancestors stay with them, and you should appease them. So when you go, you go to heaven. Silence. So students usually blend in. They're taught to blend into the crowd. So in school, it's improper to speak up, if not spoken to directly, to correct the teacher. They don't want to stand out and blend in. So that's going to be a really difficult adjustment for the students when they migrate to America, because you as a teacher have to show them or demonstrate to them that it's okay to speak up, it's okay to correct others. Arranged marriages again, because that's still practiced, especially in China, but not as harsh as in the older times. So I'm saying harsh, like you don't marry a child to an adult. It's more that like the parents have the last say in who their child is going to marry. Social standing. So that's the wealth, occupation, and education that dictates your social standing. So if you have a poorer side, if you're on the poorer side of the community, and you have a very not welcomed, you could say, occupation, so like cleaning the streets, you're not going to have a high social standing. Have they been ill served in American schools? I want to say yes, but it is getting a lot better. So exclusion. The North American culture is predominant in the examples and discussion topics we use in school. So like to have the students understand more of what the content is. So this can lead to exclusion of the Asian students because they don't understand the culture behind these different examples. So they're going to exclude themselves. We're going to try to kind of ignore them unconsciously. Stereotypes. So one very predominant stereotype is that Asian students are academically the best. They're the perfect minority. And so these students, Asian students, are not going to look at this as a stereotype. They're going to look at this as an expectation. And if we teach them to this stereotype, we give them harsher feedback and harsher tests. And then they're gonna, when they fail, they're gonna look at this and take it personally. So we need to overcome this stereotype, and teachers need to show the students that they're gonna fail, and that's okay. Labels, so that goes back to stereotypes. They're labeled as passive and inactive because they have no classroom interactions. They need longer time to process things, and because they're labeled as passive and inactive, they're ignored and forgotten. I put Pearl Harbor here because when the Japanese bombers bombed Pearl Harbor, we immediately saw all Japanese people as terrorists, as angry, aggressive terrorists. And so we put them in internment camps to kind of make sure this never happened. And because of these attitudes, we today still have a small unconscious thought in our brains that say our Japanese students are aggressive. They are uncontrollable. They're going to turn into terrorists one day. And this will lead into our teaching practices. If we think this, we're going to say they don't need to be taught. They don't deserve to have the education. And we are getting past these today, but it's still a little it's the attitude is still there inside our brains. Okay, so pause the video again and think about this question. How can you inspire future educators to become more skilled in addressing and serving the needs of East Asian students? So like I said, today we're getting more knowledgeable about the struggles Asian students face, but how can you inspire future educators to become more skilled? Linguistic challenges. So in their home country, all three, China, Japan, and South Korea, they're taught English. They're actually taught the first English lesson in 3rd grade, but they're taught in a very relaxed atmosphere to develop basic language abilities through conversations. So these students from 3rd grade all the way to the end of college are taught English because they want to improve their skills and attitudes and be globally competitive, but they don't really necessarily want them or expect them to be fluent in English. It's just to be globally competitive and develop basic language abilities. So going from not a relaxed atmosphere of English learning to a high intensive, you gotta learn English right now environment in America, it's going to be a hard adjustment for them. Actually, in Japan, in 2014, the studies show that the students weren't English proficient enough as the other countries, China and South Korea. So in preparation for the 2020 Olympics, they started putting harsher English lessons, English curriculum into the students' school so they could be ready for the Olympics. The alphabet is also different. In China, they don't have letters. Their words aren't composed of letters, they're composed of symbols. So each symbol means a different word. In Japan, they actually have 15 consonants and 5 vowels, and each vowel is always followed by a consonant. So that's going to be a difficult change when we see that there's 2 vowels, 2 consonants, even 3 vowels, 3 consonants right together. And that's going to lead to overpronunciation, trying to get those sounds out. In South Korea, they have 14 consonants and 6 vowels, and their writing, it can be horizontal and vertical. So if it's vertical, that's going to be a little harder for them to write and read. But they are exposed to Latin script in their teaching, so learning English is a little easier for them compared to China and Japan. In China, using pitch is very important because the pitch of the word distinguishes the word meaning. So the highness or lowness of the voice will make the word mean something else. So that's going to be hard for when in English we use kind of like a flat pitch like I'm using right now. I'm not really emphasizing words, or I'm not changing my pitch on each word. And so this is going to lead to overpronunciation, and they're going to most likely stress different words the wrong way. Like desert and desert. That's 2 words, but they stress it differently, and it changes the meaning. Students' past and present learning needs. Whoops, sorry. So, these students are deep learners. You don't want to look at the fact that they might be quiet and passive, but they are deep learners. They need time to understand things, and they're not surface. Not surface learners. They don't use rote memorization. They want to just sit back and take everything in. Respectful classrooms. So they're in Asia, I said their culture states to blend in. You don't stand out. Be respectful. You're the inferior. The teacher is a superior. You don't be disrespectful. And so in American classrooms, this is much different. We have students can be late. We talk out. We question their judgment, all that kind of stuff. And Chinese students, Asian students, in fact, will look at this as being disrespectful, and they're not gonna they're gonna kind of be caught up on this instead of actually learning. So we just need to kind of communicate to these Asian students that what they're doing on a level is okay. Questioning asking questions, talking out can be okay in some environments. Competitive environment in Asia is also predominant because they have very competitive. Students actually go to school 6 times a week, and then they have tutoring right after every day. And then they also have that one test to get into college. So that environment not transferred, but when you move to America, we're not that competitive. We have 5 days of school. We even have off days. We don't do most kids don't have a tutor unless they need it. So that's going to be a little challenging for them to go from that competitive environment to a more relaxed environment. Even plus, if the parents are putting a lot of pressure on the students to be well academically, then they might see this as a little more difficult for them because they don't have that tutoring or the extra day class. Moral curriculum in all the elementary schools in all 3 countries, they have a moral curriculum that is designed to develop awareness of becoming a citizen in that country. In America, we have kind of this curriculum, like history books censoring their content to promote patriotism, but it's very in-depth in these countries. In South Korea, actually, their co-ed high schools are divided by genders, but both genders, boys and girls, study the same curriculum. They have a standardized curriculum that studies tech, and they study domestic sciences. So that's like the home economics, how to cook, how to clean, all that. What can teachers do? We can become cultural competent. We need to overcome stereotypes, the model minority stereotype. We need to overcome that. Even though the student is quiet and obedient, it doesn't mean that they have to have the highest grades. Culture shock, so adopt a confusion orientation. So that I'm kind of saying that you should create an environment that is like their home, so the environment is more welcoming, and that looks like being more open and flexible in your learning styles, and be innovative in providing instruction. You have to see that the student isn't responding well to your teaching style, so you're open, you're flexible and changing, and you promote harmony in the classroom. You don't yell at students, you don't look at their failures as their only strength, you could say. And negative feedback will diminish their efforts because the parents are putting so much pressure on them, and you keep telling them what's wrong. Efforts gonna diminish. They're gonna take all your negative feedback to heart. They're gonna really beat themselves up about it. Word phrases too. So keep your sentences short. Don't use synonyms because the students most likely will only know one version of the word. They might get caught up in the beginning words and not get to the end of the sentence, not understand the end of the sentence. Also define the words. Make sure they have like personal dictionaries, so at home they can focus on their actual reading skills or their homework instead of what the words mean. What do parents want for their children? Like I've been saying this whole time, there's a very great emphasis on academic achievement because the academic achievement of their child will a higher academic achievement of their child will guarantee them a social and economic ascent in either China or in their home country, in the US. In Japan, they specifically teach their children at a very young age that if you try hard, you can do it. So that goes back to the emphasis. They relate that to the emphasis on academic achievement. That says if you can try hard, then you can do it, and we expect you to do it then. And then what they expect from us as the teachers in schools is to train their students, their child, to be academic, to succeed in school, to have high grades. So they're trusting us to give these students a rigorous academic experience. Okay, here's the last question. How can you help your students meet the high expectations their parents have? Would you make the content easier or have the students work below their ZPD? And I asked this question because the parents are entrusting them to help the students meet their expectations. But would you go so far as making the content easier to appease their parents? Because what if the student isn't doing so well in school? Okay, we're going to play this video. And I want you to think about how these high schoolers, how they're what about the stereotypes, you could say, that are around them in their school because they're Asian. This is not playing. Okay, I'm going to send you the link for this video because it's not working. Sorry about that. I tried it earlier. But just watch this video on your own time. I think it's very inspirational. These students, just because they're Asian and look differently than the other students in their school, are treated differently, and that this is how they feel about that. So it's a very inspiring video. I really hope you watch it. Differences in opinions. So in the Asian culture, they allow for more harsher punishment of their child, and that's going to be viewed differently in the Western culture in America. But it is still showing their love. So, for example, a parent in Japan, you could say, is gonna their parenting style is gonna be harsh, maybe even stifling. They might have harsh punishment. And the Western culture, we are going to see that as child abuse. We're not going to see that as the right way to parent. But in Japan, that's right. That's the parents are showing their love by being harsh and controlling. They're showing how they have concern and care about their student, what their child does. They also make a lot of sacrifices that are not fully seen in the Western culture, like leaving a good job in China for an increased education for their student. People here will think that maybe they're leaving such a good job just to come to America and take the jobs available for the Americans. The language barrier. Sometimes people will think that just because an Asian student can't talk as fluent as everyone else, that they don't have enough intelligence or capability to learn. And that's something we have to show our students, that that's not other students, that this is not right, that just because their fellow classmates can't speak English that well doesn't mean they're any less human, any less intellectual than they are. And I put Pearl Harbor here again because that we're gonna still look at these Japanese students as aggressive and uncontrollable, even though it might even be their culture to be that way, but we're still looking at these students differently. These are my references. Thank you all so much for listening, and I really hope you take away from this lesson that Asian culture is much different than Western culture, and it will influence how they learn and then how you teach. All right, thank you.